Hi everybody, it's Kerrie here at the North East Autism Society, and today I'm joined by Alison Wombwell, who is going to be talking to us about her experiences of executive functioning differences. So Alison, would you just take a moment just to introduce yourself for people that don't know who you are and what you do?
Yes, that's fine. Hello everyone, I'm Alison Wombwell. I'm founder of Chasing Rainbows, and I'm a voice, our autism journey blog, which is on social media. Basically, my blog was set up more of a hobby originally, because I like to write, but it was set up as I was going through a diagnosis. So I ended up getting a diagnosis last summer of autism and ADHD by the end of 2019. I also have two girls that are both diagnosed with autism. My eldest is currently at the end of her ADHD diagnosis. We're ready for formulation, and my youngest is just starting assessment. But in our house, we have a mixture of various comorbidities: tic disorder, sensory processing disorder, ADHD, anxiety obviously comes up quite often. There's lots and lots of things in our house, basically. But Chasing Rainbows is a support and training service. So I provide online and face-to-face workshops, which is based on personal perspective and obviously theory and working in settings, etc. And I provide a lot of one-to-one intervention support for families and individuals.
Brilliant. So you're very, very busy. Very, very busy. So today, Alison, I know we're going to talk about executive functioning, and it's something that a lot of our parents want to know more about. So just to give parents really, or anyone listening to this video, a brief introduction to executive functioning, it really is a set of mental processes located in the brain, the neurological processes that basically get the job done. I think that's how I like to describe it. So it's about the ability to plan, problem solve, sequence information, remember information. So you use executive functioning when you're planning what you're going to cook for your dinner, when you're going on holiday, when you're leaving the house in the morning. So it can be the little tasks, and it can be the much bigger tasks as well. So I suppose, Alison, as an autistic lady, what is your own experience of executive functioning differences?
I think because obviously I'm dual diagnosed, and I think that a lot of people, don't realise, even as being autistic and having an ADHD, is the impact that it has, especially on those with ADHD as well, because there's not much information out there about that. Yeah. But obviously I was very late diagnosed, but previously, before diagnosis, I would say executive functioning was probably high up there on the list of the major difficulties that I had. So I found it really difficult I could start a task, but I found it very difficult to complete it because my mind was always going, like I previously said, it's always like my mind was running on a motor. So basically I never had time to finish what I needed to do. And obviously it had an impact on memory. So I quite often forgot the important stuff because I was often too busy thinking about what was important to me, what I had to complete. And that's really, really common in children as well. Because those daily living tasks can quite often be easily forgotten because it's not important. Actually, it is very important, and it's putting those strategies in place so that we're able to obviously complete it. So that was definitely one that I struggled with in terms of memory. So again, we often speak about memory and we think, well, my child's got a fantastic memory, but actually that's usually long-term memory and being able to process facts and information and storing that. But it's short-term memory, so remembering appointments, remembering what they need to do from 1 minute to the next. Following instruction, we often hear that because often we're told what we need to do. Can you go and do this? Can you go and do that? Can you get me this? By the time you go and do it, you've forgotten what you need to get. So we know it affects our daily living massively, even as an adult and for children. And so for me, it was definitely high up there on the list that was kind of recognised quite early through my assessments.
Yeah, and because I suppose with that as well, I think there's a lot of misconceptions, isn't there, Alison? So, you know, I try and speak with parents that, for example, the child, or, you know, with my brother as well, for example, that he's not necessarily lazy. He isn't like avoiding doing it. It's just that actually it takes so much energy just to, you know, to start a task and to actually complete it is completely exhausting for him. So do you think there's a lot of misconceptions when it comes to...
Absolutely. Because, for example, when we talk about executive functioning and how it affects those with ADHD in particular, and I'll talk about autism as well. But, so for example, we're often told that we're quite lazy because we forget to do the important stuff that we know, that like you just mentioned, Kerrie. However, if we hyper-focus on what we're interested in, and basically we tune into the things that interest us, and it's very common, obviously we know with autism, then the things that are important and what we need to complete can therefore, like, it almost like disappears around us because we're too tuned into what we want to think about and what we want to do. So when we do actually almost come out of being out of that zoned in mode to the real world, often it can be mentally fatiguing on our brain to therefore try and complete the task that we actually need to complete. Does that make sense?
No, it absolutely
does. And it's very common, if you hyper-focus, and even those with autism, it's usually that they're interested in things that they want to look at or what they want to listen to, etc., etc. So by the time they actually zone back into the world around them, trying to complete those tasks, and, you know, and then move on and plan, it's very difficult because often the mind by then is already fatigued.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So what strategies do you use, Alison, as an adult?
Now, we often get told around communication aids and strategies from speech and language therapists, especially from early years, especially with children with autism, you know, now and next. So when they're little, use now and next, use a visual timetable. But who's to say that when we get to a certain age of the child, 7, 8, and 9, and I know that from having children, that those visual aids need to be taken away and they don't need them anymore. So for me, communication aids and strategies are massively important because the visual is there. They can see it. They know that that's what needs to be completed, so to speak. So now and next, we use it often in early year settings, right?
Yeah.
So if you struggle with executive functioning and being able to complete a task and then move on to the next one, why can't you use a now and next as an adult? You know, why can't you as a teenager in secondary school? Because in secondary school as well, for those teenagers, there's already enough changes in their daily life going to secondary school. They have to move from classroom to classroom, mental health, puberty, adolescence. You know, there's loads of stuff kind of thrown in the mix. So basically, having those visual strategies that we would normally think, oh, well, we use them in the early years, we use them in the foundation stage. But I would actually say the older children get, they need it just as much.
Yeah.
Because
the demand increase as well as they get older, don't they? The demands on them increase. I think that's a really good point, Alison, actually, because we do use now and next a lot in early years, but then, you know, there's the expectation that the child will then move on to maybe 3 symbols on a sheet or more, or a big planner, when actually it's not about chronological age, is it? It's about where the child's at and what they need. And if they need now and next as a 10-year-old or a 16-year-old or an adult, then that's absolutely fine.
But yeah, exactly. And it's not just things like now and next, it's having that visual timetable. I mean, now obviously I have a diagnosis. I need a daily timetable. So I know what I'm doing throughout the day so I don't forget. Because even though that I have had intervention, support and treatment for my ADHD, I've almost had to retrain my brain still. So having those strategies now, especially communication strategies, is massively helped me throughout the day. Like I say, it helps with the demand because we know that demand causes an increase in anxiety. So therefore, if your anxiety is increased, you're likely to start forgetting things. Yeah. We know that it has an impact on memory. So having that visual throughout the day, that timetable, right, that is really, really important because it doesn't even have to be like what we envision, you know, how we see it in our mind of what they have in classrooms. It could be that you're writing a list, and I write lists all the time. It could be that you've got one of those whiteboards and you just basically just going day by day. There's nothing that that tells us that we need to kind of plan well in advance, because we're often, we see and we think in the here and now. We know that we're very much, that's how an autistic brain tends to think, here and now. So it's easier to plan day by day. And there's no difference from being a child, a small child, to being an adult. We still think like that. Trust me, I'm 36 nearly, and I still think like that. And I need to plan my day just like that. So next week, when the children are off, I'll start planning and writing it down, having that visual reminder on Sunday of what I'm going to do that week, because obviously I work as well. So I can prioritise, because obviously we struggle with prioritising with executive functioning, decision making. So decision making can also come into how we manage our daily living. That could be managing money, managing those important things as an adult. I struggled massively before diagnosis with being able to manage money, because I didn't have an understanding. I do have an understanding of, you know, what things cost, but I struggled with being able to manage and know that I have to keep a certain amount for different things, because again, it's down to prioritising, planning, and that all falls into executive functioning. So having those visuals, and I can't stress enough about visuals, can massively help children, young children, older children, and adults all the way through. There should be no stigma attached to using those kind of strategies wherever, in the workplace especially, for those, because the demand that especially if you're able to mask obviously how you are feeling and your conditions, then the demand obviously on you is much higher, because obviously other people in the workplace are not aware of the anxieties that you have. So having those strategies in place can make a huge difference.
Yeah. Alison, did you teach yourself them strategies, or did somebody support you to put them strategies in place?
To be fair, I already had visuals anyway, because obviously both of my children are autistic. I mean, my youngest she's not at visual level yet, but my eldest is. And I still use visuals for her, because she was non-verbal until she was 4. And so when she acquired language, and then obviously it was kind of, oh, well, she doesn't really need picture exchange cards anymore. She doesn't really need them. You know, she's not really focusing anymore on the timetable. But the older she's getting, now that ADHD's kind of been thrown into the mix as well, the more that I, you know, like earlier you said about a lazy brain, we think some people would presume that we're lazy.
Yeah. So
having that timetable motivates her on a morning. You know, it gives, right, come on, we need to do this. We're on to this part, right? What do we do after that part? Because otherwise she would sit and do what she wanted to do herself. Probably watch something on YouTube or something like that, what most children are now, because she's interested in what she's interested in. Of course. But if time management is really important, because otherwise she would be late for everything if she had control of that, you know. So having that visual there, and I've always had that for my children, and now that she's getting older, I'm really, really reinforcing the use of visuals for her. And as much as probably some people say, well, actually, you know, she's very verbal now. You know, most people would say, I hate using functioning levels, can't stand it. But people would presume she was high functioning. But actually, it's the other things that she's struggling with, executive functioning, being able to, you know, what the tasks that she needs to complete on that visual. One could be about looking after herself, self-care. Now that might not be important to her, but you know, it is very important. So we need to implement that into a visual timetable, so she knows that that's what she has to do.
Yeah, that's also a priority. Yeah. Brilliant. Well, Alison, is there anything, before we end, is there anything else, any key messages that you want to tell people about executive function? Anything that you'd like them to know that you've not covered? I think you've covered a lot, but is there anything that you?
I think the main thing is that I don't think it's spoken about enough, and I don't think that the strategies that and I think that the strategies that we could be using, that people would normally focus on, you know, communication and understanding and expressing, because also it's about expressing emotions, because obviously executive functioning would have an impact on mental health and emotions and emotional regulation and how you feel. So having those strategies in place will help everything, or can help everything.
Yeah.
And I think that we need to really stress that, because, you know, we speak to speech and language therapists, and they're excellent at the job. They provide a lot of information in terms of diagnosis, etc. But then when we come to executive function, where we could really do with those visual support and looking at those strategies, that's where we kind of have to go with them in it. Those children and those adults are still struggling. Yeah. We know that they've caught up, maybe, perhaps, where they need to be in terms of communication, but there are other things that we need to look at, the prioritising, because them daily living tasks are often very, very demanding of us to do, because we're not necessarily always interested in wanting to do it. Yeah. So,
and it takes a lot of mental energy, doesn't it, to just get that job done. That's exhausting.
Yes, definitely. Brilliant. Definitely.
Well, yes. Alison, thank you so much for your insight. This has been brilliant. I'm sure you'll have lots of views of this video. So we'll see you again very soon. Thanks, Alison. Bye.
Thanks, Kerrie. Bye.